Brasil, país de...
Brazil is a country of 151 million inhabitants, one of the two largest multiracial societies of the Americas, with an Afro-descending population of more than 70 million, corresponding to 44% of the total number of residents. However, the experience of slavery brought deep racial inequalities, giving origin to a labor market in which black men earn only 68% of the income of white men. The judiciary system has not been able to make a rule out of what are still cases of exception. Mr. President of Exceção, with your permission, I want to introduce myself. I am Vincent Francisco de Espírito Santo, technical assistant of this company admitted in January 1975. To my surprise, I received the communication that I was included in the list of the dismissed. Mr. President, at this stage of my life, 44 years of age, and in the midst of a national crisis, the news acquires tremendous proportions, leaving me completely confused, for I am a married man with 3 children attending school, installments to pay for the house, and a whole life structured during the 17 years I worked for the company. Now, my nonconformism, however, was paramount when through my workmates I was told that the real motivation was the fact of my being black, and that my immediate superiors consider being black a crime, because they are confessed racist. The fact was confirmed by my colleagues, who are willing to testify before a committee of this company.
Naquela época nós fomos procurados pelo Vicente para fazer...
At that time, Vincent came to us to ask for a defense of his case. The dismissal occurred in extremely arbitrary terms. We sought the company and the persons involved to check if that was true.
Nós procuramos a empresa, procuramos as pessoas.
At that time, the most important phrase that revealed this aspect was, "This time we are going to get rid of this nigger."
Mais importante, digamos que revela esse aspecto, foi que, bom, dessa vez vamos nos livrar do negrão.
O clima era bastante difícil.
The atmosphere was really difficult. We saw the working relationships deteriorating, and we did not understand why that was happening. Suddenly, a boss that was your friend, who talked a lot to you, refused to talk.
O chefe que era teu amigo, que conversava contigo, se recusava a conversar.
As I used to say, the masks fell down, and the persons showed their hidden faces.
The dismissal decision was taken by the following professionals: Aurelio Santos, Fanor Espindola, and Vaner de Oliveira.
Eu entrei em contato com...
I contacted the boss, engineer Leandro, and told him about the situation and demanded a meeting with these 3 managers. Leandro's answer came 2 days later saying he could not arrange for the meeting and that he had left the room disgusted with what he had heard.
O retorno do Leandro veio 2 dias depois, dizendo que...
When he asked for the meeting, besides Aurelio, Fanner, and Vander were also present. And Vander said, "What else does this nigger want here now that we have managed to whiten the department?"
Presentes, além do Aurélio, o Vaner e o Fanor, e o Vaner disse que o que esse crioulo quer mais aqui, agora que nós conseguimos clarear o departamento.
A Eletrosul estabeleceu a...
Exceção established a process to reduce the personnel, and each department should contribute. This is the term that should be used. Contribute with the number of persons to be dismissed, and each division established its priorities to be attained and checked those collaborators who should be dismissed.
O departamento, então, passou os números para suas divisões, e cada divisão, então, dentro do departamento, então, estabeleceu as prioridades, né, que deveriam ser atingida dentro na obra da Eletrosul e verificou quais os colaboradores que poderiam ser dispensados. E nessa reunião eu fiz uma observação. Eu disse:
At this meeting, I made the observation that if Vicente worked in my division, I would have sacked him a long time ago because he wasn't a good employee.
Realmente, ele não era bom funcionário. Só unicamente por isso aí.
O senhor chegou a usar o termo negão, nome para a empresa?
Eu não me recordo do termo. Talvez o negão, talvez eu tenha.
Maybe I used the term nigger, but white in the company, I don't remember.
Sabedor de que Vossa Senhoria é pessoa de alta sensibilidade humana.
Because I know you are a person of high human sensibility, I decided to send you this request asking to suspend the act of my dismissal and order an investigation. Sincerely yours, Vicente de Espírito Santo.
Meus protestos da mais alta estima e consideração. Atenciosamente, Vicente Francisco do Espírito Santo.
Eu conheci o Vicente em 1980 no meu escritório.
I met Vicente in 1980. In this opportunity, we became friends, and at that time he complained about the constraints he went through because of racial discrimination. There was also a serious incident at the beach with his son, who was forbidden to play with the son of an important qualified employee of Electrosul.
Uma funcionária graduada da Eletrosul. Na época, em 92, quando houve a questão do despedimento,
In 1992, when the dismissal problem came up, Vicente came to me saying there was a strong evidence of racism and that he would be one of the chosen to be dismissed. I looked for the employees mentioned by him and found out that there was no criterion for dismissal and that racism in relation to Vicente was true. The name I remember of the person willing to be Vicente's witness was Engineer Leandro.
o Vicente era um engenheiro de nome Leandro.
Inclusive nas declarações que já houveram até para a Polícia Federal, né?
In the declarations given, the argument racism is only a resort that he used to return to the company because I really, the argument racism for me wasn't the reason for his dismissal in any moment. It was a process within the company to dismiss person, that's all.
O assunto do racismo para mim não foi motivo da dispensa dele. Em época nenhuma, né? Foi um processo da empresa para demissão de pessoas, só isso.
Prezado senhor, apresentamos-lhe a posição final da empresa.
Dear sir, we are presenting you the final position of Electrosul. Aiming at investigating the denunciations, we constituted a special committee to bring up the facts. After gathering the necessary testimonies and having analyzed them accordingly, we concluded there was no discriminatory acts mentioned by you. Therefore, we ratify your dismissal, having in mind the inexistence of faults that give the opportunity to annul the acts carried out by Electrosul's management.
Ao diretor de engenharia e construção.
Excerpts of Aprosul's letter addressed to the president of Electrosul. To the engineering and construction director of Electrosul. By the end of April, we were in contact with the board of directors asking for a meeting and a copy of the investigation report on suspicion of racism. We were promised a meeting as well as the report on May the 5th. The meeting was postponed without any other date, and since then we have been insisting in receiving the above-mentioned document without success.
A demissão não foi um ato isolado, mas sim um processo de enxugamento.
The dismissal was not an isolated act, but a process of reducing personnel. The dismissal without just cause is an act of power of the employer. Therefore, No matter how sordid it may be, even if it were criminal, the employee would have no right to be reintegrated to the job, but would only lead to the proper penal sanctions and a possibility of a civil indemnification for moral damages. If it is admitted without discussion in the judicial proceedings that dozens of others were dismissed in the same list, opposite racism would have been practiced by this justice if it recognized the right of reintegrating him by being black.
Racismo, ao contrário, estaria praticando essa justiça se reconhecesse a ele o direito à reintegração por ser negro.
On May 18, 1993, Monica de Oliveira, a journalism student, presented a complaint at the 3rd Police District of São Paulo, denouncing that she was refused a vacancy to work as an administrative assistant by the employment agency Global Trabalho Temporário LTDA because she was black.
Eu vim preencher uma ficha para aquela vaga.
Well, I've come to fill out an application form for the vacancy to work as an administrative assistant, as advertised in a notice outside. The receptionist looked at me and said, you've got to have practice. I've got practice, lots of practice, more than 2 years of practice. I've got more than 2 years of practice. You have to know how to type. I know how to type. You've got to have a high school degree. I finished high school. In fact, without being modest, I was more than it was being required for the job. Then she looked at me and said bluntly, but you have to be white. These were her words, but you have to be white. She said it so naturally, as if she were saying, you have to live in a beautiful neighborhood.
Outraged by the fact, Monica left the place and sought the help of the military police. When the policeman, Isaias Lopez, arrived at the employment agency, he saw the application form that had the following observation: vacancies for white persons only.
Aí o policial falou, quem escreveu isso? Quem escreveu isso? E o gerente falou, quem escreveu isso foi a central, não é culpa nossa, não tem nada.
The policeman asked, who wrote this? And the manager answered, this was written at the headquarters. It's not our fault. This has nothing to do, but there's nothing wrong with that. I wasn't upset yet, but the manager said,
mas escuta, menina, que é, hein?
Hey girl, what is it? What do you want? Is it a job that you want? I'll get you a job. No, I said, it isn't a job I want respect. The policeman didn't know what to do, he was helpless. The impression I had was that he had just entered the police. So he handed back the application form to the manager.
E ele entregou a ficha para o gerente da loja.
No inquérito.
In the police inquiry, the policeman said he left the application form with the manager to go to the car and ask for guidance. And when he came back, the application form had disappeared. Because of this, he asked for a new one exactly as the previous. However, at the police station, the employees of the company claimed that in the original application form, it was not written that the job was for whites only, but for a person with good looks. From this point onwards, the penal action did not take place because the public prosecutor asked for the inquiry to be filled and because he understood there was lack of evidence to denounce the fact, considering that the original application form had disappeared. The judge accepted the petition and the inquiry was filed.
A experiência do SOS Racismo acaba com...
The experience of SOS Racism confirms that the black movement has always had difficulties to qualify as a crime the practices of racism. In fact, it is almost impossible to do that in our society. This is demonstrated by our judiciary branch, which is one of the most conservative to the demands placed by our social movement.
As demandas colocadas pelo movimento social.
Na verdade, muitas vezes no caminho...
To be honest, many times I thought, is it worth continuing? Why does this cry have no echo? Why doesn't it reach the ears of the unsensible?
Os ouvidos insensíveis, tá? Apesar disso, num trabalho de forma...
In spite of all this, I worked my way through as ants do, visiting clients door to door, and I told everybody about my situation in Electrosul, and that I was dismissed for being black.
Trabalhando com vendas em função de que, num determinado momento na minha vida, alguém achou que por eu ser negro não deveria fazer parte do quadro de empregados da Eletrosul.
Após ano da ocorrência da demissão do Sr. Vicente,
After a year, Vicente had been dismissed from Electrosul. He looked for me as the first councilman elected in the capital, Santa Catarina, so that we could work out a solution for the racial violence suffered by Vicente when he was dismissed.
na busca da justiça diante da violência racial sofrida por Sr. Vicente, com essa demissão.
O que importava realmente era o conteúdo pedagógico.
What was really important was the pedagogical content of this kind of intervention, because the discriminating agents now see discrimination under another prism. This means they can't do anything in any place at any moment.
Fazer qualquer coisa em qualquer lugar, em qualquer momento. E, portanto, só pela quantidade de incomodações.
And therefore, only because of the amount of inconveniences they are going to face, they'll think twice before they discriminate someone. Victims of racism also have another vision of the problem. They won't accept racial violence as a norm, but as something unnatural which they are able to change.
Como uma coisa não natural e, portanto, que elas podem mudar, que elas podem interferir, que elas podem quebrar com essa norma, com essa regra.
De uma forma geral, o movimento sindical no Brasil, com algumas exceções,
The union movement in Brazil, with some exceptions, has not succeeded in overcoming the struggle for better working conditions and better wages. Subjects as racism, discrimination of women, and culture are rarely discussed.
Discriminação da mulher, cultura, raramente são abordados. E quando são abordados, não ultrapassam os limites também das discussões em teses de congresso.
Vicente's case illustrates very well the need of a union movement to put into the agenda the problem of racism, of the blacks, and the problems of the women.
A Eletrosul afirma que a sindicância criada com o objetivo de averiguar a existência de...
Electrosul confirms that the investigation about racial persecution of the employee concluded that there were no acts or manifestations of racism. In spite of being informed about the constitutional burden of proving its allegations, it didn't bring to the judicial proceedings the mentioned investigation because it contained several testimonies which would be useful in the quest for truth.
A referida sindicância, que por conter vários depoimentos, seria útil na busca da verdade. A dúvida persiste.
The doubt persists. How did the company know which employees were the ones less needed? Everything leads us to think that the persons who elaborated the list of those to be dismissed could very well have put aside technical criteria and have taken into account personal, questionable, and forged criteria.
A certeza absoluta de que o empregado foi dispensado por ser negro.
The absolute certainty that the employee was dismissed for being black will probably never be known, but one thing is true: he did not give any reasons for being dismissed. On this ground, I declare void the rescission of contract accomplished unilaterally by the company, granting the request of reintegration to the job petitioned by Mr. Vicente de Espírito Santo.
Espírito Santo.
In 1989, Kelly Cristina abandoned her job after working for 3 months as a babysitter for the businessman Rogério de Alameda, without receiving any payment. After this decision, every time she passed by the door of the grocery store owned by her ex-boss, besides confirming he would never pay her, Because blacks should work for free, he insulted Kelly Christina, saying that she was a black vulture and a monkey. Some weeks later, after he threw water on her, she decided to present a charge against him at the 20th Police District. Rogério was arrested in the act.
E ele perguntou para a escrivã, como é o nome desse delegado aí?
He asked the clerk, "What is the name of this chief of police who's interested in supporting the blacks?" The chief of police was coming in at that moment, but the man didn't see him. He was talking all the time and the chief of police was listening. He talked non-stop, saying his relatives were much more important than the chief of police, who owed him an explanation because he gave more attention to the blacks than to him. At this moment, the chief of police charged him in the act for racism. He had confirmed not only what he had said at the bar, but what he said in front of the chief of police.
Na delegacia, na presença do delegado.
Rogério foi preso em flagrante.
The case went to trial and Kelly Christina won the first stage of appeal. However, the accused was released and the chief of police transferred. The prosecutor that recognized that there had been racism left the lawsuit.
O racismo saiu do processo.
Qual que é a sua opinião sobre o caso hoje?
Eu ganhei a causa.
Well, I won the lawsuit. The lawsuit went to trial and for me it ended there.
Você não gostaria de falar sobre
Não.
dar a sua versão dos fatos?
Não, o que já foi?
No, what has been said, the lies that have been said, I won the lawsuit and that's full stop. That's the end.
Eu ganhei a causa e aí ponto final, morreu o assunto.
Em 1990,
In 1992, in a second trial, the ex-boss was acquitted under the allegation that the judicial proceedings were irrelevant because they were not characterized as a racial crime.
a 18ª Vara.
The 18th Criminal Court of São Paulo understood that the victim should have presented a criminal complaint as a crime against her honor. As this was not forwarded, the accused was acquitted.
O caso Kelly Cristina da Silva,
Kelly's case was very interesting. For us, there is a problem, for it exposes the fragility of the law that struggles against racial discrimination in Brazil. Kelly's case was recognized by the court as a case of racism.
Da Lei de Combate à Discriminação Racial no Brasil. O caso Kelly ele foi reconhecido, inclusive, pelo tribunal como um episódio de racismo. Entretanto,
However, the court and its relator understood that the Cow law did not consider the case specifically as being Kelly's because there was no impediment of social relationship, and so it was understood as a case of crime against honor and defamation.
entendeu que se tratava de um caso, portanto, de um crime contra a honra, de um crime de injúria, cuja prescrição é de 6 meses. Entendo que ainda
I think it is possible to look for a redressing of moral damages of which Kelly was victim.
para os danos morais de que a Kelly foi vítima.
Dessa forma, fica evidenciado.
In this way, it was evident by the sentence that in any moment Electrasul will practice an act of racism against one of her employees. To end this issue, we want to point out that Electrasul is going to appeal the above sentence as usual in all the lawsuits against her.
Processos movidos contra ela.
In August 1996, the Regional Labor Court of Santa Catarina judged Electrasul's appeal. The representative of the government attorney's office has an unfavorable opinion of the appeal of the company and informed that the government attorney's office would penalize the author of the racial crime.
No sentido de responsabilizar penalmente o autor do crime de racismo.
É sintomático o que o advogado da tribuna tenha relatado que alguém na empresa teria dito, apesar de...
It is symptomatic that the court attorney mentioned that someone of the company had said about the witness that even though she was a woman and in spite of being black, it is explicit the idea of prejudice and the idea of discrimination. Therefore, the government attorney's office would not omit its opinion and would render a favorable decision, not only by the impossibility of dismissal without a motive,
recurso da empresa, não só pela impossibilidade da despedida imotivada, como sobretudo pelos fortes,
but above all by strong evidence of racial discrimination which is current in this lawsuit. During the trial, only the judge who represented the employers gave a favorable vote to the company.
Nós do CERT estamos convencidos de que
We are convinced that two things are needed to face the impunity that today masks racial discrimination. First, the legislation in Brazil is concerned with the discriminator if he acted with deceitfulness or guilt. We understand that the law should consider the discrimination, therefore the victim. The issue is not if the discriminator acted with guilt, but if his conduct violated the rights of a black as a consequence of his race.
Em segundo lugar, é preciso qualificar as demandas.
Second, the need to qualify the demands of the black movement in the judiciary branch. The judiciary branch in Brazil today offers a minimum space for a serious discussion on racial issues.
Mas para isso é preciso qualificar a demanda. E eu diria que o caso do Vicente do Espírito Santo.
And I would say that Vicente's case is an example, in the sense that for the first time, there has been a qualified judicial demand. There has been a precise judicial and political intervention that has resulted in a historical victory.
O Tribunal Superior do Trabalho.
The Superior Labor Court decided it was really racism that motivated the dismissal of the employee of the state company Eletrosul. It is the first case of racial prejudice on trial at the Superior Labor Court.
Hoje, o técnico em eletrônica.
Today, the electronic technician Vicente de Espírito Santo celebrated. But in June 1992, when he was dismissed from Eletrosul, he cried. He had 3 children to maintain. His wife began to sell cakes for birthdays.
E a mulher dele passou a fazer doces para aniversários. Quando foi demitido pela Eletrosul,
when he was dismissed by Eletrosul, he wanted to know why. His immediate boss explained that it was to whiten the department.
Branquear o departamento.
Ou melhor, as informações que chegavam para mim.
Now, the information I received was that he was going to lose, even with the union movement pressing the guys up there. Everybody knows that Eletrosul here has the power. And those that have the power give the orders to everybody. They command the police, politics, health, everything, man. I'm glad justice prevailed. We expected nothing. Do you understand?
A justiça prevaleceu. A gente tinha uma expectativa que não ia dar em nada, entende? Mas o cara mostrou.
But this guy showed the willpower to prove that here in Florianopolis, where we have a city like every other city in Brazil, there is also racism. Brazil is a racist country. Are you geared? We've seen it on Globo TV, Record, SBT. Brazil is a racist country.
Já foi passado na Globo, já foi passado na TV Record, no SBT. Brasil é um país racista, cara.
When a black man rises against the power, against the white man's power, right? We have to get there, clap hands until the last man drops. Because the black movement hit the spot. We're charged now, and if the guys didn't give him the okay, oh man, well things are going to get tough.
O cara ia pegar o bicho aqui.